As we all know, the famous big three of anime are One Piece, Naruto, and Bleach. And out of the three, Bleach has always felt like the literal red-headed stepchild. Naruto gets treated like everyone's childhood, everyone acts like One Piece is the greatest story ever told, and Bleach is kind of sitting there in the corner with the fresh fit on. But honestly, I don't care what other people say. Bleach is one of my favorite anime ever, and my favorite of the big three. The fights are insane, the character designs are ridiculous in the best way possible, and the drip is unmatched. You know, Bleach is one of those shows where a character can lose a fight, reveal they were holding back, unlock a new form, and explain absolutely nothing, and yet you'll still be sitting there like, this is peak. So when I saw that Bleach Thousand Year Blood War The Calamity was coming to theaters, I knew I had to go. This is Bleach on the big screen. Not just that, but the final arc. And what I got was basically 3 episodes, a recap, and 20 minutes of director commentary. And somehow, I'm still glad I went. Because The Calamity is not a movie. It's a Bleach fan event, and it kinda works. So first, let's get the obvious out of the way. As I stated before, this is not really a movie, even though I'm a movie review channel. This is basically the first 3 episodes of the final season of Bleach Thousand Year Blood War shown back to back to back in theaters. That's the package. And I knew that going in. It's not like I got ambushed. But still, when you're sitting in a theater with the big screen, the trailers, the overpriced snacks, the guy 2 rows down, hitting his yard, eating popcorn like he's trying to intimidate it, your brain expects something that feels kind of complete. And this didn't. It felt like a really cool early screening, and honestly, that's fine. But the second the 3rd episode ended and the lights came on, I was just like, wait, that's it? I mean, not just me, but the whole audience was like, what the fuck? You know, because we were so locked in. None of us wanted it to end right there. And that's probably the biggest compliment and complaint. And the crappy thing is, the story doesn't stop at a place that feels like an ending. It stops right when episode 3 is over. The Oryu-Hashwalth fight is still ongoing, and that's one of the matchups I'm most interested in. And in the movie, Hashwalth actually gets an anime-exclusive form, which is so dope. And you know, Oryu, of course, has always been in this weird spot, where he's obviously important, but sometimes Bleach treats him like a background side character. This is Ichigo's friend, the Quincy double agent. This is someone who's been carrying emotional baggage since episode 1, so seeing him in this final stretch matters. And when the screening ended with this still unresolved, I felt like I went home with blue balls. You know, then there's Gerald Valkyrie. You know, half the remaining cast who's still alive is actively jumping Gerald as we speak. Gerald just feels like one of those villains that has unlimited plot armor. You know, everybody's throwing hands, popping their bankai, and he's just taking it on the chin. And that's exactly where the ending of part 3 left off, and that's exactly where episode 3 of the final season also left off. And you know, that's really why the ending felt so sudden. There was a lot of major fights going on. There's still big characters in play. There's still more we all want to see, but when the lights came on, it just felt like a very unnatural stopping point. And this kind of brings up a bigger thing anime has been doing lately. They'll release something in theaters, call it a movie, but it's really just the early theatrical screening of the first couple episodes of the newest season. And I'm conflicted on it, because as a fan, I think it's really cool. You know, obviously in the theater the sound hits harder, the animation looks better, and the hype moments feel bigger, especially when you're surrounded by a lot of fellow fans of the series. Because when you hear a movie, you expect a movie. You expect something made to be watched that way. Not just episodes you're going to be able to watch at home at a later date. Dandadan did something recently with its theatrical release. It was also basically just a couple early episodes with a bunch of director commentary. And again, I'm not saying that that's inherently bad. I'm not saying the anime studios are sitting in a dark room, rubbing their hands together like this, plotting on how they're going to financially terrorize the nerd community. But if they were, honestly, that's a great business model. But when you call it a movie, people are going to judge it like a movie. And a few episodes plus bonus commentary is not the same thing. That's not cinema. That's Crunchyroll with assigned seating. You know, a really good example of an anime movie done right is the Chainsaw Man Rize arc. That's the kind of anime movie I want to see more of. Take a specific arc that works like a movie and actually make it into a movie. Pace it like a movie. Give it a beginning, middle, and end. Make the theater feel like the intended experience, not just early access with a larger screen. The Rize arc makes sense for that. It feels like a complete piece. That's the difference. The Calamity made Bleach bigger, but it didn't make Bleach feel like a movie. Now with that being said, watching Bleach in theaters is still dope. You know, Bleach has always had this insane sense of style. Even when people criticize the story, the pacing, or how much the show explains things, while also sometimes not explaining anything, the one thing Bleach has never lacked is presentation. The fights are awesome, the powers are super cool and creative, most of the cast has aura for no reason. And on the big screen, that stuff works. Probably one of my favorite parts of the movie was seeing Urahara's Bankai in theaters. That was peak. That alone was almost worth the price of admission. Because Urahara's always been one of those characters, super smart, super calculated, always 5 steps ahead, and yet has never had to pull out his Bankai at all. So to see Urahara at the end of his rope and having to pull out the Bankai, seeing that in theaters just felt special. I mean, the crowd went crazy when Urahara said, Bankai. And then, my other favorite part, Yoruichi's God of Thunder form. Listen, I'm going to be professional here. Absolute cinema. That was one of those moments I was sitting there like, oh yeah, that's why I came. And then I did. Now for some of my complaints. The biggest one is Ichigo's new form, and really the overall lack of Ichigo in the film. They teased the new form, we got to see it for a second. And when I say a second, I literally mean the same amount of time it was shown in the teaser trailer. So if you've seen the trailer, congratulations, you've seen as much of Ichigo's new form as someone who went to the actual movie. And that's just frustrating. Ichigo's the main character, and he kind of felt like a side character in all of this. You know, and then on top of that, another thing, some fan favorites barely got any screen time. Characters like Rukia and Soifan had no screen time. And look, I get it. Bleach has a gigantic cast. At this point, there are like 47 characters who can reasonably walk on screen and act like they're the main character. This is both Bleach's greatest strength and biggest scheduling nightmare. You've got the Soul Reapers, the Quincy's, the Visors, the Fullbringers, the Scientists, the Captains. But because there's so many cool characters, some of them are always going to get left behind. Rukia is one of the most important characters in the series, Soifan has one of the coolest fighting styles, and in this screening, they weren't even a factor. And I'm not saying every character needs their own episode, but when you're doing a theatrical event for the final season, I want at least a quick moment for some of those fan favorites, even if it's just them pulling up. Then, after all the episodes, we get the director commentary. And I'll be honest, some of it was cool. I like the behind-the-scenes stuff. I like hearing about the creative decisions and the relationship between Kubo and the directors. But a lot of it felt less like a behind-the-scenes and more of a Kubo glazing session. And look, I respect Kubo. The man created Bleach. Kubo cooked. I understand. But after a while, I was like, I get it. This dude has aura. It just felt padded. I would have rather had a shorter commentary with more specific behind-the-scenes details. Talk to me about the animation, the music, the voice acting, the adaptation choices. We got that for a little bit, but it really wasn't long enough. I think this whole thing would have felt a lot more worth it if they would have gave us just one exclusive reason to be there. Not even anything crazy. I would have taken an extra episode, personally. Maybe an extended Ichigo scene in the new form. That was theater exclusive. You know, maybe a post-credit scene like Marvel does. Just something that made the theater version feel special. Because the content was good. That was never the problem. Problem is the packaging. And as a fan screening, it works. But as a movie, it was very thin. So who's Calamity actually for? Bleach fans, and that's literally it. If you already love Bleach, if you're caught up on 1,000-Year Blood War, if you know what Bankai means, and you've spent years defending this anime online, then yeah, you'll probably have a good time. But if you're not already a Bleach fan, absolutely not. This is not an entry point into the series by any means. You're just going to be sitting there confused the entire time. You know, this is for the people who are already locked in. And honestly, that's okay. Not everything has to be for everybody. So, final thoughts, Bleach 1,000-Year Blood War. I personally really enjoyed it, and I had a great time, but mostly because I already love Bleach. Seeing Urahara's Bankai in theaters was awesome. Yoruichi's God of Thunder form, Ichigo's final form for a brief moment. You know, the style, the music, the character entrances, the pure Bleach nonsense, all that hit harder on the big screen. But as a theatrical release, I still think it needed more. As a movie, it's thin. As a fan event, it worked. And as a reminder that Bleach still has some of the coolest characters in anime history, yeah, it did its job.